What do you do when the only man willing to help you is the one man the whole village has already decided to hate? Pentrith Cove did not forgive easily. It kept its grudges the way it kept its nets, mended and hung up where everyone could see them. Isobel Fairweather arrived on the coach from London with one trunk, one name she could no longer use in polite company, and a letter from an aunt she had met only twice. The letter said the cottage above the tide line was small but sound. It did not say the roof had been patched with driftwood for 2 winters running. It did not mention that the man who could fix it was the one person in Pentrith Cove nobody in the harbor would speak to. Isobel stepped down into mud the color of wet slate and looked at the gray water beyond the cottages, and she thought, not for the first time, that disgrace had a very particular smell, salt and coal smoke and rain that never quite stopped. 3 weeks earlier, in a drawing room in Mayfair, Lady Rowena Ashcombe had wept prettily and called Isobel a thief. Rowena's own debts had emptied the household strongbox. Her own carelessness had put her betrothed, Mr. Sinclair, alone with Isobel in a garden for 4 unwatched minutes. Rowena needed a villain who was not herself, and a ward with no father to defend her fit the part perfectly. By the time the story finished traveling through 3 drawing rooms, Isobel Fairweather was a woman who stole silver and stole men, and no one asked to see proof of either. She had not stayed to argue. There had been no one left who would have believed her over an earl's daughter. So she came to Dorset, to a leaning cottage, and an aunt named Constance who coughed through the night and called the wind a blessing, dear. It keeps the smell of the fish house away. Constance Fairweather was 71, half deaf in one ear, and entirely unbothered by scandal she had not personally witnessed. She welcomed Isobel with tea, a spare bed, and no questions at all, which was its own kind of mercy. What Constance did not mention, not that first evening, was the debt.
Storm's coming up from the south by Thursday. You'll want to see to that roof before it does.
That was the first thing Benedict Hale ever said to her, called across a lane from the door of his workshop before either of them had exchanged a name. He did not smile when he said it. He did not linger to see if she answered. He simply went back inside to the hull of an overturned fishing boat and left her standing in the mud with her trunk still unclaimed at the coach stop. Isobel would learn later that this was simply how Benedict Hale spoke to people now. Plainly, briefly, and from a careful distance, as though warmth were a debt he could no longer afford to extend on credit. She did not yet know why. She only knew that when she asked the woman at the coach, stop, who the man in the workshop was, the woman's face closed like a shutter. "That's Hale," the woman said. "Best you don't." Don't what? Isobel wanted to ask. The woman was already walking away, and Isobel was left with a warning that explained nothing, and a growing certainty that Pentrith Cove had its own Lady Rowena, its own convenient villain, and she had just been told his name. Thursday came, and with it the storm, exactly as promised. It found the weakest seam of the driftwood patch within the hour, and by midnight rain was coming through the ceiling of Constance's room in a steady, cold thread, pooling on the floorboards an arm's length from the old woman's bed. Isobel spent the night with buckets and borrowed courage, and by morning she understood that pride was a luxury she had already spent, back in London, on people who had not deserved it. She walked to the workshop at first light, her hem soaked through, and knocked on a door that had not been painted in years.
"Mr. Hale, I'm told you mend roofs as well as boats."
I'm told a great many things about myself. Most of them are only half true.
He said it without heat, like a fact he had grown tired of arguing with. He did not ask what the other half was. He looked at her for a long moment instead, the way a man appraises a hull for rot before he agrees to touch it.
"My aunt's roof is failing. I can pay what I have, which is not much, and I can work alongside you for the rest, if that helps the arithmetic."
Something shifted behind his eyes, quick and gone. Surprise, perhaps, that she had offered labor instead of simply asking for charity.
Constance Fairweather's cottage. I know it. I'll come by this afternoon and look at the damage before I promise you anything.
It was not warmth, it was barely courtesy. But it was more than the woman at the coach stop had led her to expect, and Isobel walked back through the rain feeling, for the first time in 3 weeks, that she had not entirely lost her footing. She did not yet know that offering him honest work instead of pity was the first thing anyone in Pentreath Cove had done for Benedict Hale in 3 years. If you're finding your way into this story, you're welcome to stay a while. Tell me what time it is where you're listening from, and drop a like if you'd like more evenings like this one. Benedict came that afternoon with a ladder, a canvas roll of tools, and almost no conversation at all. He worked with the quiet efficiency of a man who had learned to be useful precisely because being liked was no longer an option. Constance, who could not hear half of what either of them said, took an instant and inexplicable liking to him and insisted he stay for broth. Constance said, "You've got good hands, Mr. Hale. My late husband always said a man's character was in his hands, not his mouth." Benedict's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, and he said nothing, but he stayed for the broth. Isobel watched him from across the small table and found herself doing arithmetic of a different kind. A man the whole harbor avoided did not eat with an old woman out of obligation. He did it because somewhere under the silence he wanted to. The roof took 4 days to mend properly, and each of those days Isobel worked beside him, passing nails, holding the ladder steady, learning the geography of his silences the way sailors learn a coastline. She learned that he answered questions about wood and weather freely. She learned that any question that came near his own name closed him like a fist.
The woman at the coach stop told me not to speak to you. She didn't say why.
She didn't need to. Everyone here already knows the why. I'm the only one who still argues with it.
He said it flatly, hammering a nail as he spoke, as though the rhythm of the work were the only thing keeping his voice level. Isobel recognized that flatness. She had worn it herself on the coach ride down from London, holding her spine straight while strangers glanced at her trunk and wondered what a young woman traveling alone had done to deserve exile.
I know what it costs, holding your face still while people decide who you are without asking you first.
Benedict stopped hammering. He looked at her properly then, not the quick appraisal from the workshop door, but a longer look, as if he were recalculating something.
What did they decide about you?
That I stole from the family that raised me, and that I was careless with another woman's betrothed. Neither is true. It hardly matters. The story was more interesting than the truth, and people prefer interesting.
He nodded slowly, and for the first time, something like understanding passed between them, unspoken, the particular recognition of 2 people who had each been made into a story other people found convenient. It was not friendship yet, but it was the first crack in the wall Benedict Hale had built around himself, and cracks, once made, rarely close again the same way. The trouble arrived, as trouble in small villages often does, wearing a very good coat. Mr. Edmund Reeve was the magistrate's son, and he called on Constance's cottage on a Sunday, ostensibly to inquire after her health, and actually to remind her, gently and precisely, of the debt she owed the Reeve estate on the cottage lease. Reeve said, 3 years unpaid, Mrs. Fairweather. My father has been patient out of respect for your late husband. Patience is not the same as forgetting. Constance, flustered, promised what payment she could scrape together. Reeve's eyes moved instead to Isobel, standing by the window, and lingered there in a way that made her skin prickle. Reeve said, your niece, I take it. London manners. They rather stand out, down here. He smiled when he said it, a smile that did not reach anywhere near his eyes, and Isobel understood, in that instant, that she had just become a piece on a board she had not agreed to play. Reeve returned 3 days later alone, and this time his purpose was plainer. Reeve said, the debt could be settled entirely, Miss Fairweather, if you were willing to be sensible. My cousin Charles is looking for a wife of good bearing. He would not ask questions about London. I would see to that personally.
You are offering to trade my aunt's roof or my hand to a man I have never met.
Reeve said, I am offering you a way to stop being a burden on a sick old woman. Call it what you like. Isobel refused him, plainly, and watched his smile thin into something colder. Reeve said, "Pity. Depths do not forgive themselves for pride's sake." He left without raising his voice, which frightened her more than shouting would have. Men who did not need to shout were men who had other ways of winning. She told no one but Benedict, 3 days later, as they mended a fishing skiff belonging to a widow who could not afford the yard rates.
Reeve wants me married off to settle my aunt's debt. He was not asking.
Benedict's jaw tightened. He set down the plane he'd been using and was quiet long enough that Isobel thought she'd overstepped.
Reeve does nothing without an angle. If he wants you gone from that cottage or bound to his family, it's because you're standing somewhere he needs empty.
What could I possibly be standing on that a magistrate's son would want?
I don't know yet, but I know the shape of the man. He learned it from his father, and his father taught half this coast to look the other way for money.
It was the most Benedict had ever said about anyone in the village, and Isobel heard underneath it the outline of an old wound he had not yet shown her directly. She did not press, not yet, but she began quietly to watch Reeve the way Benedict watched the weather for the shift before the storm. The storm, when it broke, was a real one. It came in fast off the water on a Tuesday evening, faster than the fishermen had predicted, and it caught young Tam Bryce's boat still a half-mile out, mast cracked, taking water in swells that turned the harbor mouth into a churn of black lettuce. Half the harbor gathered on the quay, shouting instructions no one out on the water could hear. Benedict was already stripping off his coat before anyone had finished deciding what to do.
The skiff won't hold 2 men in a rescue line in this. I'm going alone.
Isobel caught his arm before he reached the ladder, rain plastering her hair flat, her heart slamming against her ribs.
You'll drown reaching him.
I've done this before. It's the only thing this village still trusts my hands to do.
He went down the ladder into a boat that looked absurdly small against the swell, and for 11 minutes that felt like an hour, Isobel stood at the rail with the rest of the harbor, watching a single dark shape fight the water toward another. The mast beam struck him once, a glancing blow that nearly took him under, and a woman beside Isobel gasped and grabbed her sleeve without either of them noticing. Benedict surfaced, dragged Tam by the collar into the skiff, and turned the small boat back toward the harbor with strokes that looked less like skill than sheer refusal to stop. When the skiff finally scraped against the quay, hands reached down from every side to haul both men up, and for one raw moment, the harbor that had shunned Benedict Hale for 3 years cheered his name without thinking twice about it. It did not last. By the next morning, gratitude had already begun curdling back into old suspicion, the way it does in places that need a villain more than they need the truth. But Isobel had seen something the village had chosen to forget, exactly who Benedict Hale was, without an audience deciding it for him. That night, wrapped in a blanket by Constance's fire, still shaking from cold and fear both, Isobel found him on the cottage step, staring at the water as though it might still take something from him.
You could have died tonight, and half this harbor would have called it fitting.
Half this harbor already thinks I killed a boy 3 years ago. Tonight doesn't change their minds. It just gives them one more thing to argue about at the tavern.
It was the first time he had said it aloud to her, plainly, and Isobel went very still, afraid that if she moved, he would close again.
Tell me what happened. Not the story the harbor tells. What actually happened?
Benedict looked at her for a long moment, rain still dripping from his hair, and something in his face gave way, the particular exhaustion of a man who has carried a lie alone for so long he has nearly forgotten the shape of the truth underneath it.
3 years ago, a run came through this cove that wasn't fish. Brandy, mostly French goods, the kind of trade half this coast still turns a blind eye to when it feeds their children. Edmund Reeve organized it. I found out the night it happened, and I refused to captain the boat he wanted me to captain. A younger man went instead, Davy Pruitt, 17 years old. The boat capsized in a swell not unlike tonight's. Davy drowned. Reeve needed someone to blame who wasn't the magistrate's son, and I was standing close enough to the story to fit the shape of a villain.
He let the village believe you sent that boy to his death.
He did more than let them believe it. He made certain of it, spread the word himself that I'd captained the run, and abandoned Davy to save my own skin. By the time the truth might have mattered, no one wanted to hear a different version. The story was already interesting.
Close your eyes a moment and go back 3 years with him to the night the harbor still argues about. Rain that night, too, though lighter than tonight's. Reeves stood on the quay in a coat too fine for smuggling work, counting crates by lantern light while 6 men waited on his word. Reeves said, "The tide won't hold past midnight, Hale. Take the boat out, or I'll find a man who will."
Take it out yourself, then. That swell's wrong for a loaded hull, and you know it as well as I do.
Young Davy Pruitt, 17 and eager to be trusted with something, stepped forward before anyone could stop him, chin up, certain that courage was the only thing standing between him and being taken seriously. Davy said, "I'll take her out. I've crewed worse water than this." Benedict remembered grabbing the boy's arm, remembered the argument that followed, remembered Reeves' flat refusal to delay the run for a swell that any fisherman with sense could read as trouble.
Not this boat, not this water. Wait for the tide to turn.
Reeves said, "The tide waits for no man's nerves, Hale, least of all yours." Benedict walked away from the quay that night, refusing to captain a run he knew was reckless, certain someone else would see reason before the boat left the harbor mouth. No one did. By the time he heard the shouting from the water, it was already too late to do anything but help drag a body from the surf. Reeve was gone from the quay before the tide brought Davy back in. It was Benedict who carried the boy up the beach, Benedict whose hands the whole village remembered. And Reeve who made certain in the days after that the story settled on the man left standing rather than the one who had walked away. Isobel recognized the shape of what he'd just handed her, not an excuse, but the plain, unguarded truth of a man who had run out of reasons to keep protecting a lie that was never his.
You let a whole harbor hate you for 3 years rather than name the man who deserved it.
That's the whole of it. That's the whole reason I mend boats alone and eat alone and let a whole harbor look through me. It's easier than fighting a story everyone's already decided to believe.
Isobel sat beside him on the cold step, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and for once neither of them reached for a careful distance.
I believe you?
You've known me 3 weeks.
I've known liars my whole life, Mr. Hale. You are not one of them. That much I can tell in 3 weeks or 3 minutes.
He did not answer with words. He looked at her, rain-soaked and steady in the dark, and something passed between them that neither was yet brave enough to name. The days that followed settled into something neither of them named aloud. The roof was finished by the 5th day, but Benedict kept finding reasons to return: a loose shutter, a cracked step, a chimney draft that needed checking before the cold set in properly. They fell into a rhythm built on quiet instead of confession. Mornings mending nets by the window, the only sound the scrape of twine and the gulls arguing over the tide line. Isobel learned to splice a line badly, and then, slowly less badly, and Benedict corrected her grip without ever once making her feel foolish for not knowing it. There was a particular kind of intimacy in that quiet, the kind that asked nothing and revealed everything, the careful way he set tools back exactly where he'd found them, the way her humming stopped the moment she noticed him watching, and neither of them minded being caught.
You've gone a full hour without saying a word to me.
I've found I don't mind the quiet as much, lately when it's shared instead of enforced.
It was the closest thing to a declaration either of them had risked yet, and Isobel let it sit between them unanswered, because some things are better left to grow at their own pace than rush toward a name too early. Isobel began that same week to notice small inconsistencies in Reeves' story that the village had simply never had reason to question. A ledger mentioned in passing by the harbor master, a name crossed out in the church burial register, replaced with another. She said nothing to Benedict yet. She wanted proof before she gave him hope, because false hope, she had learned in London, was its own particular cruelty. The proof found her instead, on an ordinary Wednesday, in the last place she expected it. Constance kept old correspondence in a chest beneath her bed, letters from decades of village life she had never thought to burn. Isobel, searching for a spare blanket, found a bundle tied with ribbon, addressed to Constance's late husband, who had once served as the harbor's customs clerk. Among them was a letter from Reeve's own father, dated 3 years past, instructing the elder Fairweather to record a shipment as lost fish stock rather than what it truly was in exchange for a forgiven quarter's rent. Attached to it, in a different hand, was a hastily scrawled note naming the captain of that shipment. Not Benedict Hale, Edmund Reeve. Isobel sat on the floor of the cottage with the letters in her lap for a long time, her heart pounding, understanding at last exactly what Reeve had been protecting when he tried to marry her off or drive her out. Her aunt's chest had been sitting on the truth for 3 years. She brought the letters to Benedict that same evening, her hands shaking as she laid them on his workbench.
Your name isn't anywhere in these. His is. He captained that run himself and paid my uncle's silence with a forgiven rent.
Benedict read the letters twice, his face unreadable, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were wet in a way Isobel suspected he would deny later.
3 years. 3 years I let this village believe I killed that boy. And the proof was sitting in a chest half a mile from my own door.
For a moment, Isobel thought relief would be the whole of it. She was wrong.
You cannot bring this to the magistrate. Reeve's own father sits on the bench. He'll bury this deeper than the chest it came from, and he'll ruin you and Constance doing it. I won't let that cost be yours.
It is already my cost. He came to my aunt's door and offered to trade my hand for her roof. I'm not asking your permission to fight him, Benedict. I'm asking you to fight him with me.
It was the first time she had used his given name, and it landed between them like a struck match.
If we bring this forward and it fails, you lose everything you came here to rebuild. I've already lost my name once. I won't watch you lose yours defending mine.
He said it gently, but it was underneath the gentleness, a refusal, and Isobel felt something in her chest crack at the shape of it.
You would rather stay ruined alone than risk being saved beside me.
Benedict did not answer that. He only looked away toward the water, the way he always did when a feeling arrived too large for the room to hold. Isobel left the workshop that night without another word, the letters clutched to her chest, understanding for the first time how completely 3 years of silence could shape a man's instincts, even against his own wanting. She spent 2 days apart from him, turning the letters over in her mind before Reeve made the choice for both of them. He arrived at the cottage with a magistrate's notice of debt collection, seizure papers already drawn, giving Constance 7 days to pay the full sum owed or vacate the cottage entirely. Reeve said, "I did warn you patience wears thin, Miss Fairweather. Perhaps my cousin's offer still stands, if you'd rather not see your aunt in the poorhouse." Isobel stood in the doorway with the letters from the chest folded inside her sleeve, and for the first time since London she felt something other than fear rise up to meet him.
I have a letter here from your own father's hand, Mr. Reeve, naming you as captain of the run that drowned Davy Prout. I imagine the assembly would find it a great deal more interesting than any debt you've drawn up against my aunt.
Reeve's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes went very cold. Reeve said, "You would ruin your aunt's last years chasing a dead boy's memory, on the word of a man half this coast already knows for a liar."
I would rather ruin a comfortable lie than live quietly inside one. You taught me that yourself, the day you offered to buy my silence with a roof.
She shut the door before he could answer, and stood with her back against it, shaking, understanding that she had just declared a war she had no certainty of winning. Benedict arrived within the hour, having heard from the fishmonger's boy that Reeve had gone to the cottage with papers in hand. He found Isobel at the table, the letters spread before her, her composure a thin, brave thing held together by will alone.
You showed him the letters.
I told him I had them. I did not hand them over. I'm not so careless as London believed me to be.
Something in Benedict's face broke open then, some final wall giving way, and he crossed the room and knelt beside her chair so they were level, eye to eye.
I told myself I was protecting you by staying silent. I was only protecting myself from watching you get hurt on my account. That was never protection. That was cowardice wearing a kinder name.
You are the least cowardly man I have ever known, Benedict Hale. You went into a storm for a boy who wasn't even the one who wronged you. You do not get to call yourself a coward now, when the harder thing is only letting someone stand beside you.
Whatever silence remained between them broke there, quietly, without fanfare, in the small kitchen with the letters spread across the table and the fire burning low.
Then we take these to the assembly together, publicly, where Reeve cannot bury it the way his father buried the truth 3 years ago.
Together.
The words settled between them like something finally allowed to exist in daylight, and for the first time since either of them had been made into a story other people told without their consent, they chose deliberately to write the next part themselves. The village assembly met the following Sunday, ostensibly to settle a fishing rights dispute, and every soul in Pentreath Cove who could walk was crowded into the hall by the time Isobel and Benedict arrived. Reeve saw them enter, saw the folded letters in Isobel's hand, and rose from his seat near the front with the particular urgency of a man who has just understood he has run out of room to maneuver. Reeve said, "Whatever accusation you intend to make, Miss Fairweather, you'll find this hall has heard wilder stories from stranger mouths." Isobel walked to the front of the hall anyway, her spine straight, her voice steady in a way she had not managed once since London.
3 years ago, Davy Prout drowned on a smuggling run this village was told Benedict Hale captained. I have a letter in the hand of the elder Mr. Reeve, naming the true captain of that run, and instructing my late uncle to falsify the customs record in exchange for forgiven rent.
She held the letter aloft, and the hall went very quiet. The particular quiet of a room realizing it has spent 3 years believing something convenient instead of something true. The harbor master, an old man named Pell, who had kept his own suspicions private for 3 years out of fear for his position, stood slowly from the back of the hall. Pell said, "I always wondered why Constance's husband stopped keeping proper ledgers that winter. I'll swear before the magistrate that hand is Reeve's own, if it comes to it. I'd know it anywhere." Reeve's composure finally cracked, color rising in his face, and he made the mistake every guilty man makes when cornered in public. He raised his voice. Reeve said, "This is a fisherman's daughter and a disgraced smuggler conspiring to slander a magistrate's family, and you'll all believe it because it's easier than admitting you were wrong to shun him 3 years running." The words hung in the air a moment too long, and the hall understood, all at once, exactly what he had just admitted without meaning to.
You've just told this room I was wrong, Reeve, in front of every witness who will matter tomorrow.
Reeve had no answer for that. He looked for the first time in 3 years, like a man realizing the story he had built could collapse as easily as the one he had used to bury. The elder Reeve, seated near the front, would not meet his son's eyes, and in the silence that followed, Isobel understood that some fathers protect their sons only until protecting them costs their own name too. It was Davy Prewitt's own mother who rose next, an old woman in a black shawl who had not spoken his name aloud in public in 3 years. Davy's mother said, "I always thought it strange Hale never once tried to defend himself. A guilty man fights harder than that. An innocent one just goes quiet because he doesn't think anyone will listen anyway." She crossed the hall, slow on her cane, and stood before Benedict, searching his face for something she had apparently needed to see for 3 years. Davy's mother said, "I forgive you for something you never did, Mr. Hale, because I let myself believe it was easier than being angry at a man with a magistrate for a father. I'm sorry. That's a debt I owed you, and I've been slow paying it." Benedict's composure, which had held through storms and slander both, finally broke, just slightly, at the kindness of a grieving mother offering an apology he had never expected to receive.
You don't owe me anything, ma'am. You lost your son. I only lost my name. Those were never the same weight.
The magistrate, cornered by his own father's letter and his son's public admission, had no choice but to open a formal inquiry that same week, and within days, the truth that had waited 3 years in an old woman's chest belonged, finally, to the whole of Pentreath Cove. Reeve did not go quietly. He tried, once more, before the inquiry closed, to threaten Isobel with her aunt's debt, cornering her outside the church on a gray morning while Benedict was at the yard. Reeve said, "You've ruined my family's name over a dead fisherman's boy. Don't imagine I'll forget who handed the harbor master that letter."
You ruined your own name the moment you let a boy drown to protect a shipment. I only handed the room the truth. What they do with it was never mine to control any more than it was yours.
Benedict arrived before Reeve could answer, drawn by instinct and the particular urgency of a man who has learned, finally, not to let the people he loves face storms alone.
Walk away, Reeve. The inquiry will finish what your father's own hand started. There's nothing left here for you to threaten.
Reeve looked between them, calculating one last time whether there was any angle left to play, and found none. He left without another word, and within the month, quietly removed himself from Pentreath Cove altogether, his father standing too damaged to shield him any longer. The debt against Constance's cottage was dissolved by the magistrate's formal ruling, the falsified customs record corrected, and Davy Pruitt's name cleared of the quiet blame the village had never openly spoken but had never fully released either. Benedict Hale walked through Pentreath Cove for the first time in 3 years without feeling every eye on him weigh something he had not earned. It was Constance, of all people, who noticed first what had changed between the two young people who had spent a season mending her roof, her boat, and without either of them quite realizing it, each other. Constance said, "You've been standing an arm's length apart from that man for 2 months now, Isobel. I may be half deaf, but I'm not half blind." Isobel laughed, the first easy laugh she had allowed herself since London, and found Benedict on the cottage step that same evening, watching the tide come in the way he always did, as though the water still owed him an explanation for everything it had taken.
My aunt says I've been standing an arm's length from you for 2 months. I believe she means it as a criticism.
Your aunt is rarely wrong about anything. Once you shout it loud enough for her to hear.
Isobel sat down beside him, close enough this time that their shoulders touched without either of them pretending it was an accident.
I came to Pentreath Cove with nothing left to lose, Benedict. You had already lost everything before I arrived. I think that's why neither of us was careful enough to be afraid of the other.
I had no reputation left to lose. That's true enough, but I had this workshop and this coastline and a quiet I'd convinced myself was peace. I risked all 3 the day I decided you were worth trusting with the truth.
Was it worth it?
Benedict turned to look at her fully then, the tide rolling in behind them, gold light catching the last of a Dorset evening, and he reached for her hand as though he had finally decided he was allowed to want it.
You are the only thing this coast has given me back that I didn't have to fight the whole village to keep.
He kissed her there on the step, unhurried, like someone he intended to keep choosing tomorrow and the day after that, and Pentreath Cove for once had nothing to whisper about that wasn't kind. They were married in the spring, in the same church hall where Davy Pruitt's mother had once offered an apology 3 years overdue, and half the harbor came, including old Pell, who swore he'd known the truth all along, which was not entirely true, but which nobody minded him saying. Constance lived long enough to see the wedding and to remind everyone, loudly and often, that she had liked Benedict's hands from the very first afternoon. Pentreath Cove tells the story differently now than it did 3 years before Isobel Fairweather arrived. It tells it the way stories are supposed to be told, closer to the truth than to whatever was easiest to believe. There's a particular kind of courage in trusting someone the world has already told you not to trust, simply because you looked at them yourself and decided to believe your own eyes instead. Most of us have stood at that door at least once, the one everyone warned us away from, for reasons that turned out to be somebody else's fear, not ours. I wonder how many of us walked through it anyway, and how many of us are still standing on the step, telling ourselves the warning was probably right. If you've ever trusted the one person everyone told you not to, and found out they were the one telling the truth all along, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. Some stories are worth telling twice.